pleased to see a very extremely full house tonight for Wildlife. It's one of my favorite movies so far this year. My name is Thomas Lafley. I'm the chief film critic for The Wrap and a member of New York Film Critics Circle. Without further ado, I want to bring out our guest. Please welcome Jimmy Chin. I will start us off with a few questions and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. I'm sure everybody is dying to ask some questions too. So let's start from both an easy place and a difficult place, your journey embarking on this movie, because I know as you voice in the movie, these people, Doug Tompkins, Yvonne Chouinard, Rick Ridgway, some of your heroes and mentors, no pressure, you decided to make a movie about this journey. So tell us a little bit about that responsibility, what it meant for you, and how you even got started.
Sure. Well, first of all, it is incredible to see a really packed theater. Thank you so much for coming out, and I hope you all enjoyed the film. But this means a lot to me to see this place completely packed. Yeah, for any filmmaker, I mean that very gratifying. But yes, this film we have been working on for I think close to 6 years, and we kind of make films concurrently. So we actually started this film while we were still making Free Solo, but Rick, Yvonne, Doug, I knew of them long before I ever even met them because they were pioneers in the climbing world. Clearly, they became pioneers as entrepreneurs and then also as conservationists. But I met Rick, probably in 2002 when he invited me on my first National Geographic expedition to Tibet, and he actually taught me how to film. So I have some very deep roots with Rick, and he introduced me to Yvonne at that time, and they were the ones that introduced me to Chris and Doug. And when I first met Chris and Doug, I was just struck by this incredible, well, Chris first of all, and Doug, but this incredible marriage and devotion that they had for each other, and also this devotion to what they were doing. And at the time, it just seemed so impossible. Like the scope and scale of what they were trying to do just seemed totally outrageous. And so I followed what they were doing over the years. And when Doug died, Chris had asked me to come down to climb Cerro Cristina with her. And she invited Rick and I came down. But at the time, President Bachelet had kind of, without much notice, come down to visit her to start talking about these national parks. And so we didn't go climbing, but I decided to bring a camera and just kind of film President Bachelet coming in and just kind of what was happening around the park and what Chris was going through. At the time, it was still very, very raw for Chris. And I was just kind of filming for posterity. And as she explains it, someone at the premiere last Tuesday asked her what happened, and she said, well, Jimmy just started showing up with a camera, which is kind of true. And I didn't really even have the intention of making a movie, and sometimes those are the best because, I think this other film that I made, Meru, it was the same thing. I was just filming things, and then it just got to a point where I was really compelled to tell a story or really inspired by a story. And this story, at some point, I can't define exactly when, but I just felt like I had to make this movie because of what they were doing, the lives that they had lived, and the kind of ethos in which they lived by, and this just incredible love story that really inspired me. And of course, Chris's story and how, she transforms over the course of this film, as you see. and even through this huge loss, kind of finds her voice in this next third or fourth chapter of her life, because she's such a courageous woman. She just never settles, and is always gonna push forward. So that I thought was really inspiring.
And so tell us a little bit about bringing Chris on board, because I'm sure she had to be convinced at some point that this all the lives, multiple lives that they lived, is worth telling in a movie. What was that process like? Kind of gaining her trust, not as friends because you were already there, but as filmmakers, kind of convincing her to do this.
Yeah, I think Chris and Yvonne and Doug, they all had kind of public personas, right? She's a CEO of an iconic brand, and Yvonne is a founder of the brand, and obviously Doug was a founder of a couple of brands. They had this public persona, but their private lives, they were extremely private about. And they're also of that generation and ethos of like, say less, do more, walk the walk, don't spend all the time talking, it's like, and so we did have to, especially with Yvonne and Melinda, that took a little bit of time, but I think Chris trusted us, and it still took some time, because it's just, I think when you ask that question, it's hard, like, put yourself in the place of Chris, or let's say even Alex, but I mean particularly Chris, but being a participant in a film is really, really hard. Like, people are going to come, these filmmakers are coming in with a scalpel, and they're gonna basically like dissect your life, and then make a movie about it, and then put it in theaters in front of all these people that you don't know. I mean, and go way deep, and you have to show up and be entirely vulnerable for it to work. Like, it's really hard to do. And she's smart. She knew what it was going to be. So it was funny because she told me that she ended up spending some time with Alex Honnold from Free Solo. And she asked him, and of course Alex had like an Alex answer, which was like, well, they're filmmakers, so I just assumed they were going to make the film, and I would just fly into the mountain. And
That was very Alex.
yeah, and so she was like, but there's always truth in what Alex says, right? Because he doesn't function that way. But she was like, it was kind of refreshing, because she was like, okay, I just have to commit, and you guys are the filmmakers, and I'm going to trust you, basically. So
she just needed to hear something so raw from
from Alex.
Like Alex.
Yeah,
I love that.
and that Alex still loves us, which is good. We're still very close to all of the subjects or participants in our films, so far.
So, a very sort of filmmakerly question. One of the things I love about Wildlife is how many different stories you're telling in it. There's the love story that you mentioned, and I always believed you and Chai Basarelli, your filmmaking partner, and your wife are romantics at heart. We see that in Free Solo, we see that in Rescue, but there's also the story of 3 successful brands as entrepreneurs, and there's a story of your mentors, and also there's a story of Chris finding her voice, along the way. So the question is, how do you find the movie among all these amazing threads, storytelling threads? And then you captured footage for 6 years, and there's all the archival material. So tell us about kind of diving into this jigsaw puzzle and telling us the
painful.
story.
It's really painful, and you have to bleed for it. The documentaries are, that's why we love them and we hate them, right? And it's the story usually, it reveals itself. Sometimes in production, or parts of it are revealed in production, and sometimes some of it's revealed in the edit. It's usually both. But as we started making the film, because at some point we thought it was going to be a film about Doug, and then of course you could make a film about Yvonne too, but really the biggest transformation happens for Chris. And she's really kind of the glue in the story. She comes kind of up with Yvonne, who's this visionary entrepreneur, but she's really the one that creates Patagonia and runs it and makes it such a huge success. And again, with Doug, she falls in love with him in her 40s. He has this vision of building these national parks, and she's really the one that's kind of able to raise the money. I mean, she's like a CEO, and she's the one that is able to, make this dream happen. But through that loss and through this her journey, she really does find her voice, and she talks about how she's always been this pebble that's kind of being pushed along downstream, and towards the end she's like, that's no more, like I know exactly what I'm doing and I live with intention. And she the courage it takes to kind of live your life in that way and to come through something that difficult really kind of became the heart of the film. And we try to pack a lot in our films, and make them really dense, but all these other pieces are just, I think, pointing towards the choices that all of them made to live their lives in this way that I think is really inspiring. And of course, Yvonne, gives away his $3 billion company to fund saving the planet. And it was so awesome because I was talking to you about it earlier, at the premiere when he was a few days ago, when he was here in New York, which he never comes to New York. And Melinda was like, does he really have to wear a jacket? And I was like, well, it's a cocktail party, and he doesn't need one. She's like, well, she spent the whole day sewing his one jacket. But anyways, there's a room full of high net worth individuals at this premiere. I mean, there's probably 20 billionaires sitting in there. And Yvonne just goes, I just believe you're born naked and you should die naked. And it's just so awesome. He's like Yoda, I swear. I mean, every time, he doesn't say much, and every time he opens his mouth, like people like me, we're just like, what is he gonna say? And it was just amazing. He always has the best lines. But yeah.
That's just that line is so in step with what he did in the end.
Yeah.
It's incredible. And this part is, probably really difficult to talk about, but I was really moved by the way you included Doug's passing, the accident in the movie, and the way you use animation, very respectfully, very elegantly, just made it all the more emotional. So what was that decision like to, represent what happened to him in the creative way that you did? Did you have discussions with Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I think just as an approach to our films in general, we try, like we're always very restrained in our storytelling. This is nonfiction, documentary filmmaking. We try to let the stories kind of be the drama instead of dramatizing the stories or over dramatizing the stories. And often we find less is more. And I think that's a complaint we always have on like maybe other projects that, if we're critiquing something.
Mm-hmm.
So we're both of that kind of mindset where it's about less is more. And it's one of those creative decisions that I hadn't really formulated it, but I went and shot a bunch of kind of scenes in the ocean, and then we kind of animated it in that way. And in the edit, you know, we were just kept pulling back and pulling back and pulling back until it got to where it was now. And it's also, it's actually, there's a, I don't know if it's Yvonne's, but there is that design philosophy where it's perfect when there's no more, when there's nothing left to take away, which is kind of like not everybody's design philosophy, but for me, you know, it's always function over fashion, and because I'm an alpinist, so I'm a minimalist. I try to take, I cut the tags off my jacket when I go climbing in the big mountains on expeditions, but it's like that, you know, where we're always kind of like pulling it away. Our thought, our process is always, if it works without it, then it works. Yeah.
Do you remember, before I opened up to the audience, when you screened the final finished film for Chris, Rick, and Yvonne, do you remember what they said, what their reactions were? Could you share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I was obviously really nervous. Probably even more nervous sharing it with Yvonne, because nobody wants Yoda to be pissed off at you. But of course, I did notice that Hugh had been very emotional during the screening. I'm sitting 2 seats behind, trying not to stare, but like I could tell he was emotional. And then we got up and we were walking through the door, and he just put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "Well, you nailed it." And that was it. And I was like, that was basically like winning an Oscar. It was just a huge relief, because I trust his instincts. You know, I mean, he's so grounded and real, and also, you know, candid. So that was really meaningful. And I think Chris was a little bit more reticent, just because, I mean, imagine someone making a movie about you. It's just hard to absorb. It takes a minute. But I think she's really, she feels like it's true to the story. And that to us is the most important.
Thank you for sharing that. So let's take some questions from the audience. Great, several hands. There's one right here. Please wait for the microphone.
Hi, right here. So thank you for sharing these stories. I feel like you share stories about the way people live and treat the earth that I wish we saw more of. So my question is, what do you hope that younger generations take away from these films? Because I know it could be a message like, you know, spend more time in nature, but I do feel like there is also a deeper message to it, or a deeper hope. So I wanted to, hear about what that might be for you and your team when you create these films.
Did everyone hear the question? Great.
Well, Chai and I had talked about this, and I don't know when it came into our consciousness, but we talked about the fact that we made this film for our kids. You know, not only because it's a hopeful story about the environment, which we don't get very many of these days, but that you have agency, and that kind of sitting on the sidelines isn't really an option anymore. And but I mean, look at what a really small group of friends that started out as basically climbing bums, living in Yosemite, or surf bums, and the impact that they have had on the world. And that was just a handful of friends, you know, and that had vision, and that had commitment and perseverance and grit to kind of follow through, and the courage to dream these dreams and to follow through on them and not give up. I mean, I don't know if it comes across in the film, but I mean, 25 years on a project where it's basically, you know, like a Sisyphean task. Like, it just, you're just pushing this giant boulder up this giant hill and everything is against you. It's one thing if you do that for 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years or 10 years, but to do it for 25 years, like the level of commitment that takes, I think there's something to be said there. I mean, I don't want, it's kind of a high bar for kids, but to kind of wrap their heads around, but more it's, we should be wrapping, as adults, we should be wrapping our heads around that. But for kids, it's also just saying, you do have agency, and look at what just a couple friends that got together and had an idea can do.
And it's a great message for, people other than kids as well. For corporate America, this is a big message that I would like them to
We had a
take the
very
right
strategic invite list to our meetings, like our, premiere and
Amazing.
Mama. I was like, okay, now we have Yvonne here. Like you could, it's pretty awesome.
Let's take a couple more. Over there. Wait for the microphone, please.
Testing.
Congrats, Jimmy, on the film. I sense another Oscar coming. I just wanted to ask, I was just curious to know what lessons has Chris and Doug's story taught you about conservation, about love, and about life? And it's a loaded question, but.
I mean, I think the thing that really, well, there were quite a few things. I mean, what I just talked about, what it takes. And I understand that, like anything great requires, what kind of level of commitment it requires. It's just that they take it to another level, right? And they always have taken things to the next level. Like, especially when I first saw them as climbers, they were already doing these climbs that were way ahead of their time. And people still, to this day, are considered really difficult climbs, but they did it in the 60s and 70s. But I think as mentors, just because they've always been a couple generations ahead, and so I've been able to kind of use their lives as a roadmap to a certain degree. And just to see them talk about, this chapter in my life, I have, it's never over. And, she finds the love of her life in her 40s. She leaves everything behind and risks everything and blows up her personal life at that time because she thought there was more to her life. And that just takes, everybody here is an adult, like, you know what that takes. That's like really terrifying and takes a lot of courage to do. But then in this kind of next chapter, just it gives me a lot of hope that there's and motivation and inspiration to keep pushing forward. There is no retirement per se. There's just there's always more to do. And I think that's something that I've appreciated about how they live their lives.
Thank you. I think we probably have time for one more. Let's make it a really good one.
Hey Jimmy, I just want to say, one, thank you for inspiring me to pick up a camera, and two, thank you for kind of representing people that look like us and pushing forward in this space. So my question for you is, now that you're sitting in this chair, how do you what's going on in your mind, looking back on your life? You started off like kind of dirt bagging, living out of your van in Yosemite, and now you're an Oscar-winning filmmaker. What's kind of going on in your mind? Is that something you envisioned for yourself at the age of 20? And on top of that, for people like at the start of their careers at my age, trying to put their name on a door, do you have any advice for, kind of building something for themselves?
Yeah, well, when I was 20, I absolutely had no sense that I would ever even be a photographer. That wasn't even on the list of things I was gonna do. Certainly not a filmmaker. I just wanted to climb, and ski and spend time in the mountains. And honestly, not much has changed. Not to say I haven't evolved at all, but basically, I was just in tram line in Jackson, and my friends in the tram were just like shaking their heads because they were like, "You are the exact." I mean, it's true. Like, part of me has not changed at all. But I look back and, I mean, obviously, I don't think it was a very linear trajectory. And we all have, everybody here has their story. And I think what a lot of people get caught up on is that they don't feel like they're getting somewhere with what they're doing. And that might sound in contradiction to what I was just saying, but I also think it's really important because when I look back on everything that I've done, it was all part of what created who I am today. And it's important also to be present in what you're doing now because every part of your life informs the next step of your life. I think there's a delicate balance of just settling for the status quo and being in a state of or not trying to move forward, but I think that intention is great. But that, being present in what you're doing now, to take what you are supposed to learn from what you're doing now so that you can parlay it into something else later, that's important. Like, there's no kind of shortcut to moving through life in that way. And I always feel like, if you're not paying attention to what you're doing now, it actually causes you to get stuck. So I really appreciate all the experiences I have, and when I look back, I appreciate that. I feel like I took some of them for granted when I was actually having those experiences. So I think it's important to kind of be present in the experience you're having now and parlay it into what you want to do in the future. And that's kind of what I still continue to do. And I don't know, hopefully that's helpful, but.
And what you're saying is also at the heart of wildlife. Exactly, just being present and then pushing for that. There's no shortcut.
Yeah.
This is just the most beautiful note to end this conversation on. Jimmy, thank you so much. Thanks everyone.
Thank you so much. Of course, if you enjoyed this one, tell your friends to come and see it. It's in theaters for a couple more weeks, and
it's the opening weekend, so this is the most crucial time to spread the word.
Yeah.
So post
So
about it
thank
on
you.
social media.
Thanks for coming out.
Thank you.